Hello and welcome to this episode of Triggered and True, featuring renowned emotional health consultant Laura Duncan. Thank you for being here, and thank you for investing the time to learn how to take care of your soul. If this podcast sparks any questions, feel free to submit a question by going to triggeredandtrue.com, scrolling to the bottom of the page and clicking Ask. If you would like to learn more about Laura Duncan, we encourage you to follow Laura on Instagram and Facebook. Also, a great resource for you to consider is the Compassion Method Master Course. This course is a deep dive into Laura's life work, the Compassion Method. The Compassion Method is a process that empowers you to learn to see and comfort your internal pain and to discover your true self, that beautiful, wonderful part of you that has been there all along, but has simply been covered up. To obtain the master course, go to compassionmethod.net. And as a podcast listener, you qualify for a $50 discount that can be obtained by typing in the coupon code podcast50. Again, that's compassionmethod.net, coupon code podcast50. We hope you enjoy this episode. Good morning, Laura. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good.
So we are going to be talking today about the marketplace and the compassion method in the context of the marketplace. All right, I thought we'd start off today with a question from one of our listeners. And the reason I wanted to start with this question, because I think it ties in with a lot of what we're going to be talking about today in terms of the compassion method in the marketplace. So the question is, can you break down the gift to know we are enough? This listener says, I'm going through your course and struggling to understand what that looks like and feels like. I'm also struggling with protected, not because I don't understand the word, but I can't really identify the feeling of experiencing someone else's protection for me. All right, so we have two struggles here, and I think both of them tied directly to what we're going to be talking about in the marketplace. So why don't you start off by answering that, Laura?
So the gift of enough can kind of be tricky sometimes because it's not connected with what you do, it's connected with who you are. But because of shame and because of our performance and our desire to be successful and desire to do a good job, we usually connect that we are enough because we do enough. And so a lot of times people don't understand the difference between the two. So that's kind of where you start. Are you connecting to being enough based on what you do? Or are you connecting to being enough based on who you are? And if it's based on who you are, you don't have to do anything to be enough. You already are, just because of who you are, the unique characteristics and traits that make up who you are. So that's kind of the gift of enough. And then protection. It's one thing I do recommend is we have on Instagram, we have a gift series, essence series. And we talk about the essence of each gift, what the gift sounds like, what it looks like, what it feels like, so you can connect with the feeling of it. So if you're struggling to connect with protection, one, it probably means because you haven't really felt that before, so you don't have a grid for it. But ways to connect with protection would be descriptive words like feeling safe, feeling held, feeling calm, feelings that are connected to feeling protected. And so you want to connect with the essence or the substance of it, not just the words that would describe being protected.
Yeah. And as we go through today's podcast, I think this will come up more and more. What you're talking about will come up more and more. So the compassion method deals with issues of the heart. And our heart is with us wherever we go. So it should be no surprise that our heart goes with us into the marketplace.
Surprise.
Surprise. And many of us, and many listening to this, myself included, spend the majority of our waking hours, up to half, some people more than half of their waking hours, in the marketplace. And, or if you don't yourself, you have a loved one, more than likely you have a loved one who does. And I think that's why I really want to spend some time talking about this, because really, as I've experienced more in the marketplace, more training, business coaching, that type of stuff, I really feel there's a new era in management. And that management is focusing on the whole person. And they draw some of this from social psychology. And one of the business coaching sessions I attended, they talked about fundamental attribution error. And this all gets kind of funny here in a little bit. So just bear with me as we go through some of this academic, businessy sounding stuff. But the fundamental attribution error says it is the tendency for people to overemphasize dispositional or personality-based explanations for behaviors observed in others while underemphasizing situational explanations. In other words, people have a cognitive bias to assume that a person's actions depend on what kind of person that person is, rather than on the social and environmental forces that influence the person. Well, that is a really fancy way to say what Laura always says: what you do matters, but who you are matters more. And that is one of the beautiful things about the compassion method, is it takes some things that can be rather complex and explains them very simply. But what you do matters, but who you are matters more. So do you want to expound on that a little bit in the context of what we're talking about today, Laura?
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes it feels like it's the direct opposite, because in a workplace, you're usually being, I was going to say criticized, but not mean criticized. You are as you're going through your work, people are looking at your performance. They're looking at, where you're at. They have a measuring stick of how much you sell or how much you do or how much you produce. So I think that that's what makes it difficult in the workplace to really feel like that's true. I think if I said that to certain people that were very performance oriented or had bosses that were very performance oriented, they would say, you know what, I don't think that's true. I think maybe I matter a little bit here in my workplace, but overall what I do matters more. And I think that's something in the workplace that really has to be, just as much as you're saying that we should start addressing the whole person in the workplace, we should start addressing who the person is in the workplace just as much as what they're doing. Because if their quality of life is not good because internally they're striving and struggling and frantic and anxious and trying to perform, not only usually are they not as much of a quality worker, but they're also not able to have peace, not able to be connected to themselves in the workplace. And like you said, if you're spending 40, 50 hours a week at your work, then that means a lot of your life, you're not actually being connected to who you are. You're identifying as what you do just as much as your employer might be identifying you as what you do.
Yeah, that is absolutely a challenge because results matter. That's the other way to say that. What you do matters, results matter.
Results matter more. So, yeah. And then people even say things like, everyone's replaceable, like there's a lot of like these one-off lines that kind of reinforce it, which ultimately is reinforcing shame in the workplace.
So if this is the case, and maybe in the marketplace, it's almost the hardest place to look at what you do matters, but you matter more. How would you suggest a employer approach this?
So as an employer, it's very tempting. You're responsible for your business. You're responsible for your employees. There's a lot of high stakes feelings involved in completing sales or jobs or whatever you're doing in your workplace. And so as the employer is able to see the person for who they are, they're able to bring out those characteristics that allows that employee to become a true employee. And a true employee is going to be using their right brain as much as they're using their left brain. And in our right brain, we think with creativity, we think with inspiration, we think with faith and belief. We think with, just a different type of brain that's actually as productive as our logical brain that's trying to complete numbers and complete assignments and complete jobs. Because when we pair those two together, you actually have a full employee versus just a working employee.
Yeah, and I think that would have a tremendous impact on longevity and employee retention
and quality. Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. You see so many employees burn out, frustrated, disgruntled, not thriving in the workplace. Even if their performance is thriving, they're not thriving. And if you walk into a room with 10 employees, 20 employees that aren't thriving, they're all disgruntled and complaining and just struggling through, it's going to affect your quality of product, your quality of service.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has a huge impact on corporate culture when you look at quality control. And, you think about businesses like Enron, how that dysfunction and illegal activity creeped into the business culture to the point where people honestly didn't think they were doing anything wrong, because they're just like, this is just the way that it's done. We just cover up these things and we sweep these things under the rug. And you wonder, like, how does that happen? Well, this is probably how it happens, right?
Yeah, because what you do matters more. So your integrity doesn't matter. Your convictions don't matter, because they're all connected to who you are. So you have to get rid of those things in order to do things like that. And that's because the culture represents that it doesn't matter who you are if you're a person of integrity. It matters what you do. And if you do the right thing, then it doesn't matter. And that's a huge compromise of person and compromise of business.
Yeah. And so much of business is, it's the results driven part is left brain. So it's things you can measure. It's things what's your earnings? I mean, I would hate to be a publicly traded company, because it's like every quarter, like, here we go again, like, what can we do to make the quarter look a little better? And those are things that are easily measured, easily quantified. But a lot of what we're talking about here, it's harder to measure. It's more of a longer term perspective. Employee retention is something you can certainly measure. You can do surveys on job satisfaction. And I actually spoke recently with an insurance company that's trying to incorporate something like this in their modeling of businesses, because they said what they found is that they would go into businesses like factories, and they would go to two different types of industrial factory settings that had the same safety protocols, the same training, the same facilitators of the training. But yet one would have this fairly poor safety record, and one would be considerably better. And they're all scratching their heads. Well, we check our boxes that we did all this training, we did all these things, but yet it's working one place and not working another. So they recognize is that there's something more. And what we're talking about is the something more. So they're trying to build a model so that they can actually measure the something more, measure how people are, in our words, living from their true self and able to express their true self at work, because their true self is going to be safety conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Their true self is going to care about other people. That's just.
Yeah. And a lot of times people think if you're more focused on who a person is, or as focused on who a person is, you're not going to have as many results. But it's really extraordinary that once you're connected to true person, true employee, you actually usually have a lot more results, or the results that count. So it's not necessarily that you have to sacrifice, an employee performing well, but they're going to perform well so much better from, like what you're talking about, their true self.
Yeah. There's actually a story of probably from 70, 80 years ago at this factory where they had to produce so many, for simplicity's sake, they just had to produce so many widgets. Okay. And at the end of the day, the one shift started writing a number on the board about how many they made. There's a chalkboard, and they just put a number. And it's like, we completed 10 cycles of this. And the next shift would come in and they'd look at that and they'd be like, wonder what that means. And they figured out what it meant. So then the goal became everyone wanted to beat that number on the board. But my point in sharing that is that work became play. And if people are full, if people are living from their true self, work is how adults play. We don't go to a sandbox. We go to an office, but that office can be our sandbox. It's where we can express our creativity. It's where we can express ourselves and we can be ourselves, and we can play with a bunch of other people our age. So
yeah,
and younger
maybe
and older.
We would not dread going to work so much if there's actually play involved.
Right. So so that's kind of where we want to end up, but we have some work to do to get there, obviously. And that work is learning to take care of our hearts and learning to take care of our triggers, which are revealing, as we've talked about over and over again, our triggers are revealing the pain in our heart. And so what are some of the common triggers that you see in the marketplace that commonly come up with people in a work setting?
Well, it's kind of a little bit of a chain reaction from what we started talking about to this question is, so people, if when they're not seen for who they are, eventually they're going to feel like they're not appreciated. They're going to feel like nobody sees them. Nobody hears them. They're going to feel a lot of a lack, which is going to cause triggers. And I'd say that's a big part of not feeling appreciated, not feeling like you're enough for your employer, your workplace. Another trigger that's common is, well, like we swing the pendulum where we are going to feel like someone's not appreciative. People don't recognize what we do. We're not enough. Or we can swing the pendulum the other way and become our own taskmaster and feel like we have to do everything in order to make our employer okay with us. And so I think the most common is not feeling like you're enough in the workplace, and then also not being known in the workplace.
Yeah. And I think that many in the marketplace, you've said this before, many in the marketplace have high triggers connected to value, worth, performance. And what we're trying to do is get our needs met there. So in your case of enough, if we're trying to get that need met in the marketplace, wow, what an opportunity to like cut corners. Like we're going to do whatever we can desperately.
Oh yeah. Compromise yourself and others in order to do it, because it becomes life or death, because we're no longer in our adult brain in that moment. We're back in our early childhood development home, and our bosses are like our parents, and we're little kids again with this capital N need to prove that we're enough, just like we've been trying to prove our whole entire lives. So you can see how high the stakes become when you have to be enough in order to be connected, in order to feel like you belong, in order to feel like your boss is going to care about you or appreciate you. And that's one of the things that gets very kind of messy in the workplace, is that whole fact that our early childhood development self is trying to get from our bosses what our parents weren't able to give to us.
Yeah. And like I was talking about earlier with the quarterly earnings, you'll never be enough. You will never completely satisfy
There'll
those.
always be another number. Exactly.
Those
if you could do
shareholders
that
are
good
always
last
wanting
quarter,
more.
yeah, exactly. Then why can't you do more this quarter?
Yeah. Yeah. So, which is so important that we have to know in our hearts that we are enough, whether we make those quarterly numbers or whether we don't. It is who we are has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be challenging when the whole workplace revolves around that. But just as much as the employer is trying to create a space for the employee to know that they're enough, the employee has to do just as much to know that they're enough. Because even if the boss does everything perfectly and does, emotional health and connects to who the person is and does all the right things and gets the right programs and goes through the whole process, if that employee doesn't know how to take care of their own inner world, then it's still going to be up to them as the individual. Just like a parent can only take a child so far in it, an employer can only take their employees so far in their internal world.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a huge area of personal responsibility here, which is a wonderful thing because it doesn't depend on anybody else.
I know exactly, that's why I do a lot of blame-free business with people, of just being able to say, you can't change your employee, you can't change your employer. You can only take care of you. And at first it's frustrating because we really like to blame. We really like to make it about the other person because then we don't have to take care of our own internal pain. But like you said, at the end of the day, personal responsibility means that I can actually take care of my heart and not be triggered in these places, whether my employer or employee changes or doesn't change.
One of the things, that question earlier from the listener also talked about protection. One of the things that I've recognized recently that I'm like really coming to terms with, so to speak, is how much of the need of protection I derive from my balance sheet.
Makes you feel safe.
Yep. And I would guess that a lot of other entrepreneurs, part of what drove them to be entrepreneurs was wanting to control their own destiny.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to depend on somebody else to protect me. I'm going to take care of me. I'm not going to, if there's going to be layoffs or whatever, I'm going to, if you're the owner, if you're the entrepreneur, if you're doing it, you don't have to be beholden to that.
Exactly. That gives us kind of a false form of safety.
Right.
We're still high at risk being the employer, the entrepreneur, but it makes us feel safer because it's in our hands now.
Yeah. And I think I think that's probably what sometimes, our protectors are what drive us. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, but in my case, my protector is one of them being performance, and how that manifests, positive performance manifests in a better balance sheet. So I'm getting a need met in a rather unhealthy way. The world wouldn't necessarily, as long as you're not breaking any laws, the world doesn't look at it as unhealthy, but it very much is an unhealthy way to get it met. The good thing is that things come along to threaten the balance sheet, and that's your wonderful opportunity to address that.
Yep. It's most likely going to trigger you, and then you can deal with why it bothers you when your balance sheet is not working correctly.
Right. And what's beautiful about that is when that does come up, it's not beautiful in the moment, but the beauty in it afterwards is that you learn that your internal world is not dependent on that external world being okay.
Yeah.
So
exactly. And you can see how even we've mentioned codependency in past episodes, but you can see how there's so much codependency in the workplace of, I'm not okay if my balance sheet, it doesn't balance. I need my balance sheet to balance so that I can be okay, or whatever it is that people are going through. And so when we recognize that it's not we can still be okay. Like you just said, we can still be okay, even if our external world isn't okay. And that's, I think, a huge thing, that if we were able to not be codependent in the workplace, it would lead to a lot more peace and joy and creativity in the workplace.
one of the things that I see in my employees, you have this adage that the customer is always right. Well, that sounds great, but a lot of what drives that is the absolute uncomfortability inside of someone when a customer is not happy. And I really see this in my staff. I have a staff that I think leans hard that direction, that the customer is always right, and goes so far out of their way to accommodate them. But I also see how some of that's driven by, they're not okay if that customer's not okay.
Exactly. And I think that's a lot of our motivation. And at the end of the day, it's impossible for the customer to always be right. I understand why people say that. I grew up with that same, I have come from a long line of business owners. And so that's what my grandma would always say, the customer is always right. But if we've talked about in the past, when you're in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, a lot of customer service becomes fawning, where we're not okay within ourselves. And so we're trying to say everything and do everything to make this customer happy, because we actually feel personal rejection in it, or we're personally scared that if they're not happy, we're not going to be okay. And so I think that's a huge thing in the workplace, that we have to be okay even if they're not. And sometimes that will mean saying no, or they'll mean saying we're not going to be able to accommodate that, instead of saying we'll accommodate it and then we know we can't. We're just doing it because it's too scary not to try to accommodate their need.
Well, and a lot of times when rules get broken or boundaries get pushed or even laws get broken, it's because of that. It's not because the person is just trying to make an extra buck. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's just because they couldn't tell the customer no.
Exactly.
And the customer is wanting them to do something that wasn't right, and they just didn't have it within them to say no. And the reality is, like you said, the customer is not always right. It's not a good slogan. And one of the things I do with my staff is I actually talk about that, and that's
good.
There are going to be scenarios where there is absolutely nothing you can do. They're still going to be upset because they're triggered. And when we're triggered, we're hurting. And when we're hurting, instead of facing our pain, we blame. We talk about that a lot. And we have to create a villain. And sometimes you are the convenient villain.
Yeah. Yeah. I was a server for a couple of years when the kids were young, and I saw that so strongly, that the servers would go out there and smile to their tables, give them, good service. And then they'd come back and they would just tear into them verbally, just so angry with them, so upset with them, and then go back out again and smile and do the whole show. And I remember always thinking like, wow, like such a discrepancy to put on this like customer service and then take it off and be really angry and upset because you weren't acknowledging what your needs were in that moment. So you blame the customer.
So that customer becomes a wonderful opportunity then.
Mm-hmm,
so we talk about an opportunity. So maybe if someone hasn't listened to all of our podcasts and they go, well, what's the opportunity there? So let's just review. The opportunity is you've been triggered.
Opportunity.
You're a server. Go back to being a server, and a client just really was rude and mean, and you did everything right, and you smiled, and you got the food on time, and you accommodated all their crazy dietary.
Oh yeah.
Don't do this. Don't do that.
Flashbacks. They're all coming back. Just joking. And when I talk about triggers, I also talk about them being justifiable or non-justifiable, meaning that a lot of times when you're dealing with people with food, people are very picky, like you're saying. They have a lot of expectation,
especially in California.
Yes, exactly. And they're trying to get like a need met through coming and getting served. So they want you to serve them and meet a need inside of them that's impossible to meet, but there's still that expectation.
I never thought about
strong.
That.
Yeah.
Huh.
I think it's because food's a connection to like home, to family. Like when you're sitting down around a table, it creates the environment of, and some people's upbringing that you sat down around the table as a family. And then food is a strong comforter. They say that the dopamine that we receive from food is higher than sex sometimes. And so, which you would just not think about because you're just thinking like food, that doesn't even seem like that big of a deal. But people are getting dopamine fixes through food. Now they have this high expectation going out to eat that they're going to get even more of a thrill from being able to go out to eat. So there's a high expectation.
I'm thinking your time being a server drove you to do some serious research into this.
It definitely did. No, and also really helped me because people are so triggered when they go out to eat. Not everyone. There's some really great, kind, amazing people. But more people are triggered than not. They want their food to be a certain way. They have an expectation for an experience. And it's your job to make that experience happen, even though they're coming from work, super upset, not doing well, want to take out their day on somebody else. And you just happen, servers a lot of times are the scapegoats to a lot of people's blame and their frustration. So like I said, it was very, very justifiable to be triggered because if you replay the scene, and if I got my jury out and I asked 20 people, do you think this customer is, behaving well? They'd all be like, no, no wonder you're so triggered. You keep being triggered because this is so justified. Girl. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's actually what happens. There's a reinforcement of it over and over again because it is so justifiable, because we have a list of record of wrong. We can say the top 10 things that customers come into restaurants and do. So all that to say, you're in a triggered state. You just went to true story. This guy had come in and he put a stack of $1 bills on the edge of the table. And he's like, that's your tip. Every time you do something I don't like, I'm going to take money away. Yeah. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Like,
what you do matters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't matter, and what you do matters more, for sure. So anyways, there's customer situations like that trigger you because you feel like you're not being valued. You feel like someone's taking advantage of you, that you have to do the whole show for them and you don't have any way out. It feels trapping. It feels frustrating. It feels discouraging. And then your livelihood is dependent on it, because if they don't think what you did as well, even if you do all the right things and check all the boxes, if they don't think it's a good job, they're not going to tip you. And so being able to take care of your inner world is so important. So what I would do is, we had a walk-in refrigerator there. And so I would go in. I didn't even know this process that much at the time. I mean, I kind of, you look back in hindsight and you realize you've done a couple of things that do seem like the compassion method, but I wasn't at the time actually doing the compassion method. But I go into the walk-in fridge because nobody could hear you in there. And then no one would bother you in there. And then I would just be able to be frustrated or like feel what I was feeling. Then I would get softer and I'd be able to recognize that I could be okay even if the people were treating me badly. And then I'd bring comfort to myself, whatever that looked like in the moment. And then I'd go back to the table. And my whole goal was that I didn't serve a table for the person. I served a table for myself. And if I served a table for myself, then if they were unhappy, it wasn't about them being happy or unhappy with me. I was only doing whatever I could do in the situation that I knew I was doing my best. So if they weren't happy, that was okay with me. And so, but I had to get to that place because at first, because I'm a fawner, I wanted them to be happy. And if they weren't happy, I would go home at night and think through all the scenarios of what I could have done or not done until I made it less about my external world and more about how I was feeling internally and what I was choosing to do internally, not for them, but for myself. So it's a little bit different than we talk about with the trigger, but kind of a similar response.
Yeah, well, it was like you didn't have all of this formulated in your mind yet.
No, exactly. But I knew I had a big response. And I also knew that I didn't want people that were behaving badly, because those are like customers that would like literally yell at you and stuff like that. I remember thinking, I don't want the customers that are behaving badly to get all the attention. So with that guy with the dollar bills stacked on the table, I actually gave him good service, but nothing like extra because I didn't like how he was setting that up. And so I would like spend time with the tables around me. And one time I came up to him and he goes, I've been watching you and you're talking to all of the other tables, but you're not talking to me. And he's like, and he took like a couple dollars. And he's like, so I'm gonna have to take this. I was like, that's fine. And then I just went back to doing my things and talking to the people, but he was so upset because he couldn't control it. And he actually was looking for connection and relationship. It wasn't about the dollars on the end of the table. It wasn't about him. He was trying to control the situation, but it was only because he felt out of control and he was trying to get connection and relationship through that behavior.
Yeah. So how big a tip did you get?
I can't even remember. I think because I was so like doing it not for him, but for myself that I didn't think I remember counting it because I was just done with it.
One of the things that in our business we have to get better at, and is something that I think as we get more filled inside of ourselves, we can be better at, but is the concept of firing a customer. And that's a customer that probably should just be fired.
Yeah. So, yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. I totally agree. And being able to having the option to be able to fire a customer is really important, because if you feel like you have to, it takes all your power away ultimately.
That you have
never
to fire.
Have to,
right.
Or we don't have, or like we can't fire them. That takes all the power away, whether you fire the customer or not. Knowing that you have the ability and you're able to fire a customer if you need to is really important.
And that you can be okay either way.
Yep, exactly. And that's a big step, because we're, again, trained from a very young age. And whatever customer service you started out, most of your employees probably started out as a server, or as working in retail or fast food or something like that. And so once they've had those jobs, it really trains you how to do customer service really well, but almost to a fault, because you end up taking on abuse. Ultimately, that's what it is. Not being able to say no, not honoring and respecting yourself, because you have to at all costs, which creates an environment that's not a healthy workplace environment.
One other thing I was wondering if you could do that you and I have talked about in the past is, can you explain the concept of a shame high, and then provide an example, maybe a marketplace example?
I think we have a really good one about that one.
I do have a good example.
How about I explain it and then you give an example? Because I actually like your example, and I have them too, but I can't think of it right off the top of my head right now. But so shame highs are interesting because we all know what shame lows are. So to bring it back, shame says what you do is who you are. And so most of us recognize that there's shame connected to what I do bad means that I am bad. That's what shame would say. But that's why, again, like we talked about in the beginning, who we are is so much more important than what we do, because what we do is not who we are. So if you take that same concept of when we do something bad, we're bad, then it goes, the same concept is true that if we do good, then we're good. So people are in a perpetual cycle, usually, especially in the workplace, of doing not doing good, not doing good, not doing good. And then all of a sudden we're doing good, we're doing good, we're doing good. But what goes up must come down, because it's still contingent on what we do. So it's always going to be subject to your external world. because what we do, we're never going to be able to do everything perfect all the time. So we're going to feel that low. But then when we do finally feel like we're doing really good and we make that deal and we make that sale and we're on top of the world, it gives us what I call a shame high, which means that I am feeling so good about myself, not because of who I am, but I'm feeling so good about myself because of what I did. And it doesn't mean that we can't celebrate our successes. It doesn't mean we can't get excited or happy when we do things, but we don't want our identity to be contingent on what we do, whether it's good or bad. But you had a great example about that shame high.
Yeah. And it happened, actually had the whole cycle happen in like a 1 week period in 2 different conference rooms with 2 different clients. So I was with one client about a week prior and he was not happy. And I remember like, I felt like I lost myself. I was in the conference room, like I was disconnected from myself. And I was like fumbling and bumbling for words and just kind of like, and all I could think about was get me out of this room. Not that the guy was like being threatening or anything, that I felt threatened, but I just could not stand the unhappiness coming from him and just the feeling that I screwed something up. And then less than a week later, I'm in a different conference room with a different group of clients, and they're sitting around. They were in our office, actually, this time before I was at the other guy's office. And they're sitting around the table with his business partners, and me and one of our staff were explaining a concept to them. And the patriarch of the group just stopped us like mid presentation and said, this is why we like working with you guys. And I felt it because you were explaining this to me,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like the endorphins come, and it was like so pronounced because we were just talking about it, that I felt like I was getting an absolute high. And I felt like almost outside of myself in a different way. And I thought
euphoric way.
the euphoric way, I'm like, okay, shame high. Right. But the truth is the same person that was in the conference room at that other place is the same person that's here.
Yeah.
And one person appreciated it, one person didn't, but it's still me.
Yeah. Same
person doing the same things, giving the same presentations, giving the same explanations. And, but so, yeah, obviously, like you're saying, we want to celebrate those things. We just don't want to get our needs met through them. And to me, a shame high, it's a different kind of trigger, but it's a trigger nonetheless. And it's still a good thing because I'm learning to recognize that, okay, I'm getting a need met through this.
Yeah.
That's not how I want to get my needs met.
Exactly.
That little boy doesn't have to make everybody happy.
Exactly.
Yeah. They're fleeting.
Yep. Yeah. At the end of the day, if your sense of value, your sense of worth, your sense of being okay revolves around what you do, then you're always going to be chasing success, but you're never actually going to be able to enjoy your success truly. You might have that euphoric moment in the moment where you're triggered by it, but at the end of the day, you don't get to experience it in the depths that we experience things when we're connected to ourselves versus just connected with what we do. And you see it's so common in the workplace, especially, that people are frantically trying to close deals and make things happen and, hit these marks and check these boxes. And then when you see their personal lives or when you talk to them about their internal world, they're tormented, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're never okay, they never have enough, they're never happy because their whole entire world revolves around what they do. So there's no depth of who they are. That who they are is being completely neglected as they continue to chase success.
One other question I have for you is, I was wondering if you could explain how in business, the pain and triggers of others can be manipulated to coerce someone to make a decision. So kind of like the impact of shame and fear in the sales process.
Yeah, that's a big deal. You can for sure be controlling and manipulating people, even if you say it nicely and you do it nicely and you say all the right words, you can still be manipulating someone because you're recognizing that you can take advantage of their fear. You can take advantage of their weaknesses. You can be able to, that's a lot of times, sadly, makes a good salesperson. They're able to recognize a person's weaknesses and push that button to be able to get what they wanted out of it. I remember doing, excuse me, going to one of those, what are they called? Like timeshare presentations.
Yeah.
And
they're
I
the
remember,
worst.
yeah, they are the worst. And I remember like their tactics for it was exactly what you're talking about, where they were like, don't you want to be a good father and mother and give your children great experiences and memories? And then when he used to say, no, I don't want my kids to have great experiences. I don't want to be a good mom or a good dad. But it pushes on all those things because they know that parents' weaknesses is trying to make their kids happy. So if we can get you to get this timeshare to make your kids happy, then you're going to feel guilted and you're going to feel motivated to make this sell.
Yeah, that's an extreme, like definitely an extreme version. I think probably one a lot of people can relate to, because a lot of people have probably been on vacation somewhere and they said, hey, you get a free dinner, you get a free bottle of wine if you go to this seminar. Yeah. And they go to it and, oh my gosh. And then the husband and wife are not talking for 24 hours or longer.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Oh my
Someone
gosh.
said yes. No, just joking. So that's the extreme version, like you're saying. Yeah. But we see it in a lot of minor ways in the workplace as well, because people are recognizing people's scared. They're recognizing where there's an opportunity. And when they are able to present it in a certain way that causes people to feel like they have to say yes because they're scared, then now we don't force anyone to do anything. It's still their choice. But now we're using sales, trying to be enough because of our franticness inside of us is connecting to the franticness inside of the customer or the client. And so we want to be able to be people of integrity that doesn't have to guilt or shame or fear people into making decisions, but actually does it from a place of what's best for that client or that customer. So going back to being a server, I used to upsell. Like I was one of the top people that upsold, but I didn't actually do it to make more money, even though, I mean, I was raising a young family. We did need money, but I honestly did it because I wanted the people to have the best experience. And so I would recommend things and I would say like, this is what you could do. And they would end up buying more, but I wasn't doing it because I wanted to make more money. I was doing it because I actually wanted them to have the best experience. So when we are not doing it out of fear, we're not doing it because we need this deal or we need this, whatever it is, then we're able to actually not only do what's best for us and be integrous and be connected to who we are, we're actually be able to connect with who that person is and do what's best for them as well.
Recently, I was talking to someone about a sales approach, and he was telling me, you need to present it this way because research says that people feel the pain of loss 2 times as much as gain. So you position it as what you're protecting them from losing, not from what you're going to potentially gain, and really hit on that. And the thing from, I kind of challenged him on that. But then as I've thought about this more and what you're talking about right now is that, the real recognition that we won't need to manipulate others to make a sale, and we won't fall prey to the manipulation of others. Because a lot of times people say yes to something just because they can't say no, because they don't want to let the person down or let the person sitting next to them down or whatever.
Totally. And if you're doing a short-term business goal where you just want to sell whatever that is, never see that person again, maybe that works. I still feel like there's dissatisfaction connected to it. But I know in your business, you have a lot of long-term clients that you want to be able to maintain for a lifetime.
Generations.
So exactly. Literally. So if you want a generational client, a long-term client, it's never going to be, you may make a sell from fear and loss, but you'll never sustain a sale through fear and loss.
Right. And if we're full, if our heart is full, if the 10 gifts are living in our heart, not only will we not need to manipulate others to get stuff done, because our true self won't do that. Yeah. Our true self honors other people. It respects other people. It does what you did, is that when you upsell them, it's because you want them to have the best experience.
Exactly.
And also we won't fall prey to the manipulation of others. So could you imagine what a test it would be to go to the timeshare presentation
Mm-hmm.
and be okay and be at peace?
Yeah. And not be
like
annoyed, not feel frustrated. Yeah,
like
exactly.
sitting in the middle of a messy room and being okay for the neat freak, So.
Oh, that's a good challenge. That would be hard for me because I like start analyzing it and start recognizing what they're doing. And then it makes you want to get, the fight or flight. It makes you want to either run out of the room or makes you want to challenge them because I know what they're trying to do. You're manipulating me.
Yep. Well, that's our homework. We're going to go to a timeshare presentation and we're going to be okay. And our being okay is going to rub off on them to be okay. And yeah, anyway, so to kind of conclude our time here, I think one of the things that I would like to stress to anybody else, maybe that's a business owner or, anybody in the marketplace, especially really anybody, but I think it brings home, like if your compensation is directly connected to commission, that's like that constant reinforcer of, hey, what I do matters, because my paycheck at the end of the month has everything to do with what I did, and as a business owner, you're always that way. You're always 100% commission, but even if it's not money, maybe it's, who wins the employee of the month thing or whatever, So the thing that I really recognize in business is that money follows value. It's like one of the most basic economic principles. So if your goal is to create value, money will follow. Yeah, the money part just like works itself out because that's just the way economics works. However, the point I really want to make is that there's nothing more valuable than a person living from their true self. So your true self being expressed in the marketplace has infinite value because there's only one of you. It's like that unique diamond that with the special cut, and there's no other diamond with that cut, and with all those other things they measure diamonds with, you're that unique. And if you're operating from your true self in the marketplace, that's a tremendous amount of value that only you, nobody else in the world that ever has been or ever will be, can bring to the marketplace what you can bring. So that has infinite value. So if you have a culture where you're helping people live from your true self, money follows value. That money part is just going to work itself out.
Yeah, exactly. And just, we don't get it, since we're wrapping up, we won't get into it, but there's a lot of comparison and competition in the marketplace as well. And so when you are connected to your true self, you're no longer subject to that as well. You can be uniquely you and be successful in yourself without having to compare yourself or have an unhealthy competition with someone else.
Well, yeah, every business that is truly successful is not just trying to copy somebody else, right? Yeah, they're trying to create. I read a fascinating book that I would recommend to anybody in the marketplace years ago called The Purple Cow. And the reality is, in The Purple Cow is like, what's that unique thing you're bringing to the world? And basically the gist of it is, if your business is just trying to parrot what somebody else is doing, that's not a good business model. Go back to the drawing board. And the reality is if you're living from your true self, every one of us brings a purple cow to the marketplace.
Yep, exactly. Naturally, just as you're putting more attention on who you are versus what you do.
Because what you bring is something unique that nobody else is going to service the client that way. Nobody else is going to explain it the way you can explain it, because you bring you.
Yep. So valuable. Another homework assignment that would be important to do in your workplace,
because I don't think many people are going to do the timeshare one.
Yeah, probably not. And I don't want to be responsible for that, so maybe don't do that one. I'm just joking. You get in a lot of trouble with those. I remember I was with my husband at the time and I was kicking him under the table. So I was like, don't say yes. He was like, I want to provide the best life for my children. I was like, no. He was getting suckered in. But anyways, he said no, so that's important. But anyways, all that to say, homework would be, instead of saying, what can I do more in my workplace, how can I be more of who I am, and writing out those things that make you uniquely you, and then putting attention and time to bring those facets of who you are out into the work that you do. So it doesn't mean, like I said, what you do does matter. So it doesn't mean don't do anything, but you matter more. So whatever you do it from who you are. And that might take some time to connect with who you are. So because we've been so programmed to connect with what we do in the workplace, that this is a change of thinking to be more offensive instead of defensive and connecting with what you bring to your workplace.
Mm-hmm. And maybe recommend this podcast to your boss.
Good one.
Third piece of homework right there.
Because as long as we can take care of our boss, then we'll be okay.
Because if our boss would just get this, if he could just get this or she could just get this, then we could be okay.
That's what it feels like. That's why we like to blame our bosses, but we could actually be okay even if our boss doesn't get it.
Yep. Even if your boss just laughs at you when you make the suggestion to listen to a podcast.
Exactly. You can still be okay within you.
All right. Well, thank you, Laura, for your time. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And if anybody has questions, please remember to ask us a question on our website, triggeredandtrue.com. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Triggered and True. We hope that you enjoyed it. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, go to triggeredandtrue.com, scroll down to the bottom of the page and click Ask. And if you would like to learn more about the Compassion Method, be sure to check out the Compassion Method Master Course, which can be purchased at compassionmethod.net. And as a podcast listener, you qualify for a $50 discount, which can be obtained by typing in the coupon code podcast50. Again, that's compassionmethod.net, coupon code podcast50. Thank you again. Goodbye.